Welcome back to Morning Joe. Live look at Capitol Hill on this summer morning. Mike Barnacle is still with us, and joining us on set, contributor to Newsweek and the Daily Beast and vice chair of the consulting firm Hill Norton, Mark McKinnon. We also have executive editor from the New York Times, Jill Abramson, who made this year's list of Forbes' most powerful women. She didn't just make the list, Joe.
She's like number 5 with a bullet on the planet.
Look at this list.
Yeah.
If I could just show you, it must be good to be Jill today.
Okay, so
I think it is.
Number 1, the lady who runs Europe.
Yeah.
Number 2, the lady that runs the world.
Yep.
Number 3, the
future president of the United States.
Lady who runs Brazil.
Melinda Gates. And then Jill. Not bad.
It's an honor, but the only power I have derives from the impact of the journalism of my colleagues. So
that sounds good.
Spreading the love.
Speaking of, Mike Barnacle.
Speaking of which, yesterday, front page story in the New York Times, an extended takeout on the casualty count in Afghanistan, and within the body of the paper, inside 4 clear pages, pictures of the dead, 2,000.
Very powerful.
Congratulations to the New York Times.
Thank you very much.
For doing something that more newspapers, both local, regional, small and large, ought to be doing to make sure that people in this country are aware of something that politicians apparently are unaware of. Yeah. We are at war.
And journalists.
It's the longest war in our history.
Well, in the lead of yesterday's front page piece in the Times involved a 21-year-old Lance Corporal, young Marine,
Gregory Buckley,
from Oceanside, Long Island. And when you tell people in terms, as Joe, we did last week and we did yesterday, he was 10 years old when this war began. He was getting a school bus at this time in his life 11 years ago. And now he's dead in Afghanistan.
It's remarkable, and on the front page was that extremely emotional picture of his parents after his death. And the collective images of the soldiers on those 4 pages just looking out at you is really something. I was in Afghanistan a year ago, doing some reporting, checking in on our reporters there, and went out, and it's remarkable how committed our soldiers are to their mission there. You talk to them, they believe in it. They're trying to make Afghanistan better. It's a difficult task.
It's a terrible task, Jill, but one of our great frustrations over the past 3-4 years here on the set is the politicians and the diplomats will come on and will ask why we're there, why are young men and women dying, and they really don't have an answer. Sometimes they'll say we're in Afghanistan because of Pakistan. And then after the camera turns off, they just sort of sit there and shake their head. They don't have a good answer. And the New York Times did something yesterday that and you guys have been covering this, of course, better than anybody else, certainly in print. Why hasn't the media focused more on this directionless war over the past 3 years?
I think it's difficult to cover. It's dangerous. It's 10 years plus. The attention span of the media, especially in your corner of the trade, television, is not always sustained on a story like that. And I think in the coming year there will be more coverage because, we're looking at the drawdown of troops, and what will happen in Afghanistan after that is an important story.
Let's hope we have a drawdown.
One thing I think
over the next
interesting
year.
About all that is 60 Minutes fairly recently, the former head of the CIA, involved in the CIA, Kofor Black, was saying, my job was to go out and take out the Taliban. We did that. My job wasn't to build schools, and I mean that wasn't part of our mission. So it does beg the question: what is it? I mean, that was the mission, to take out the Taliban.
But now the worry is that the Taliban is creeping back in very visible ways there, and that's part of the mission now, is to try and prevent that.
Well, that's the problem. I'm sorry, I'll say
kind of
your side of the trade and my side of the trade, you being an exception on your side of the trade and us being an exception on ours, to be quite honest with you, have ignored the fact that this mission has changed completely. As Dr. Brzezinski said, I think your father was prescient 3 years ago. He said, we have to separate al-Qaeda from the Taliban. Al-Qaeda wants to blow up buildings in New York and Washington. The Taliban doesn't. And I think that's still a distinction lost on a lot of policymakers. Why don't more reporters press these politicians? Because we don't like Barack Obama tripling the number of troops in Afghanistan. But Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan seem to want them there longer, and yet we don't hear questions on the campaign trail about Afghanistan.
I think, Joe, you're right that these issues are not paramount in the campaign, especially right now in the lead up to the conventions, and that they should be pressing the president and Mitt Romney and some of his foreign policy advisors.
No. And Dan Senor. I told you, you can blame everything on Dan Senor.
Well,
he wants to keep
hear about it in the debates.
To 2030.
Hear about it in the debates.
Will we really?
Yeah, I think there'll be a focus on foreign policy.
You know
in
what?
the debates, I'm hoping that there's a real conversation.
Well, there's
There
usually
is
one debate
foreign
that
policy
has a
debate.
foreign policy
And this would be
focus.
one question. Right, in one debate.
But you're right, it's absent from the campaign.
And what's so obscene, and somebody brought it up yesterday, and we've been saying it for some time, politicians in Washington have known, Mark, that this war, as redefined over the past 3-4 years, to take out the Taliban was unwinnable.
Yeah.
But nobody, Republicans or Democrats alike, the president didn't want to be weak and be the Democratic president that quit Afghanistan, and the Republicans are obsessed with making him.
But you know what's interesting,
look
Joe, is
weak.
where the popular uprising among voters on this issue?
That's easy to answer. That's easy to answer. Coverage of the war, as Jill pointed out, it's an enormously dangerous war to cover. It's also an enormously expensive
yeah.
war to
Right,
cover.
to keep a fully staffed bureau in Kabul with security.
And people who subscribe to the New York Times or the Boston Globe or the Washington Post or the LA Times, or who buy it infrequently off a newsstand, most of them have no investment in this war.
And there's no draft.
This war is being fought by fewer than 1% of us.
Yeah.
That's the power of those photos, I think.
Yes.
Oh, it is.
It really is.
You
Really
feel,
is.
I must know one of these
It's
people.
And it's
But
personally.
we don't.
I know.
That's the problem. We don't.
And isn't it amazing? Ted Koppel did this, I guess, in 03, 04? Was it Ted Koppel
Yes.
that did this?
Yes.
And there was a big outcry about it when he was showing the faces of the dead. I don't know why there was a big outcry. But it seems almost like the politicians and a lot of reporters and a lot of voters just don't want to hear about it. Just don't want to see it. That's why I loved what you did yesterday. The Times forced Americans to look at these soldiers and Marines who gave their all in the eyes.
Joe, we spoke earlier today about the deficit, $1 trillion of deficit.
Right.
And
How much is that going towards Afghanistan?
And we addressed the issue.
We're over $2 billion a week.
And we addressed the issue of courage or lack thereof among politicians to speak sense to this, to talk about the entitlement programs and cutting the entitlement programs in order to deal with the deficit. We also have a lack of courage in dealing with Afghanistan.
Yeah.
This is not our country. It is a largely illiterate nation with a median age of 17 years, 8 months.
Right.
There is
You go there, and then tractability of the situation there becomes evident. I mean, when you are driving, you see still some of the old Soviet tanks on the roadside, rusting away.
It's unbelievable.
What is our objective? To get it up to the 18th century?
No, there is no objective. And by the way, the people that knew Afghanistan, the former great New York Times reporter Dexter Filkins came in and told us like 4 years ago, you can't bomb, unlike Iraq, you can't bomb Afghanistan back to the 15th century because they're in the 2nd century.